Trilobites Part 2. Let's go. Functional anatomy. Or, like, what does that part do? What does that part do? So, now that we're learning about trilobite appendages, we can start to make comparisons with some other arthropods. And so, in various arthropods, in like a pycnogonid sea spider, in one of these little myriapod guys, I'm not sure if that is a centipede or a millipede when it's all curled up, and in something like a shrimp or a crayfish, you will get some modified appendages, and the modified appendages are going to be found on the males, and for the most part, they're going to be involved in mating. Although, the most adorable thing, the little sea spider, the male actually has that extra set of appendages there, and they curl around, and they're called ovagers. It's going to carry around the fertilized eggs. So the female spits the eggs out, the male fertilizes them, and then carries them around like a good papa underneath in these little arms. It's absolutely adorable. Yeah. um, but so if you can spot the modified appendages, then you have correctly spotted the male. And so this is a way that we can potentially tell who's who, from our early arthropods. And so here you can see a trilobite that's got something going on in the middle. Let's look a little closer at that, shall we? So, zooming in here, you can see it's got the normal sort of walking length legs, and the gills would have been on top of this. I don't know that they fossilized well in this particular one, and so those were either excavated away. They've had to actually dig through this very thin fossil to look at the parts that are underneath. But you can see the sort of normal appearance. It's kind of a long leg there. And then you get to these right down here as you're getting just right before the pygidium. And look at that, this big chunky thing with this little hook. And there's another one behind it. Two modified appendages on each side. And those are probably claspers. And if you know about arthropods, and arthropod sex in particular, it's pretty common to see that the males will have some sort of hook, which will actually potentially jab into or between the plates of the female so that she cannot get away, or so that the male stays attached, however you want to view this. Yeah, it doesn't work very well in human terms because it's pretty terrible. But this is the way mating occurs. So like when you see dragonflies floating around, there's two of them stuck to each other. That's why he's hanging on for dear life with his evolved mating hooks. So it looks as though this is a male trilobite, and these are its claspers. And so we found them. They're down here right next to the pygidium. Wouldn't necessarily be in that exact position for other trilobites, although we would look for them to be in a similar position. However, we don't have so many trilobites, and we don't have nice male-female distributions on so many trilobites where we can actually see their legs. We have lots and lots of trilobites where we just have parts of the cephalon or parts of the pygidium, and that's enough to name one, but it's not enough to tell you if what its pronouns are. So yeah, let's work it out. Here's another way to tell your trilobite pronouns correctly. Yeah, respectfully. There are some trilobites, and this was first reported by I think he's called Richard Forty, and he's a gigantic big wheel in the trilobite world. Wrote a bunch of populist books about it. Really good scientist. Named a ton of these things, and published this paper where he notices that there are some species of trilobite where some of them sometimes they seem to have this sort of bulge right near the front end of the cephalon, and other times they seem to not have that bulge. What could this be? And so the idea is, I wonder if this is a brooding pouch, because on several kinds of arthropods, they will have sort of a pouch that grows on sometimes the male, sometimes the female, and it will contain the eggs, and so they can gestate in there, get through their earliest metamorphoses, so that when they come out, they're ready to hunt on their own, at least a little bit. And most of them will probably die, but at least they have a little better chance of survival. than if they were just abandoned as eggs, because then some grazer can come along and just remove your entire genetic lineage in one go. Here's from the paper. So there we see a pouch, there we see no pouch on the same species. Interesting. Here's one with no pouch, here's one with a massive pouch, here's another one with a massive pouch, all the same species from the same place. Different kind of trilobite. Yeah, and these are other trilobites that have apparently modifications of this part of the shell. And so the idea on this paper is that this may be a marking in certain trilobite groups at least of female trilobites, that they may have a little pouch or a little spot to put a pouch on the front end of the shell. And so if there are differences like these that are actually the differences between sexual dimorphism, male and female, there may be species of trilobites out there that have been named based on this difference. We can say, oh, it's maybe a different genus, certainly a different species. And it may just be that you have dimorphism and they're actually just his and hers trilobite cephalons. Yeah, which would be kind of neat. But let's go back to Beecher's trilobite beds and see what we can see. So here's another particularly wonderful example. And look what's up there underneath some of these legs that are under the cephalon, which may have been involved in food gathering or digging behaviors. They're great digging tracks. And look at that, little tiny golden eggs. So this particular one, Triarthris, doesn't appear to have had a brood pouch kind of on the front end, like people have little dogs right on their surfboard or something. Yeah, didn't work that way, but may have had a little brood pouch here in the side, or may have just kept a clutch of eggs in the side. No idea whether this is a female or a male that is holding on to the eggs, because there are arthropods where both of those things could be true. It's not easy to make that distinction. The legs are apparently either missing here or modified, and that's about where you'd look for those claspers. So it's possible that this is a male, but certainly not conclusive. And here's a little zooming into the eggs, and you see the eggs. They're just these little, must have been little bacteria that were laying down little clusters of pyrite around themselves. And so they don't even completely cover the egg, but they give you enough of it that you can actually pick out what's going on. So this is just a zoomed in version of that, which is a zoomed in version of that, which is a zoomed in version of these little guys that are tucked up here. Yeah. And so these are a couple of trilobites where there are some eggs tucked in there. And they weren't noticed at first, but in 2017, yeah, great paper noticing the little eggs in there. Fantastic. Okay, so once you've got your trilobite eggs, then what? Now what? Because these are ecdysozoans. They have to shed their exoskeleton, and be soft for a little while in order to grow. And like babies, and you can buy them cute shoes, but they go through them really fast. Yeah, these go through a lot of metamorphoses and a lot of growth in a very short amount of time. And so what they're going to do, you're going to have the first set of stages, and so we call those the protaspid stages. In these, you're going to start with probably eyes, or at least eye spots up at the front. Those are going to then move over to the side, and they're going to occupy that position essentially for the rest of the life of the trilobite. Then what you see is that it is essentially an undivided organism. It's got basically a cephalon, it's got something like a pygidium, but they're all one piece. It's just sort of imprints on there. And then it's going to go through a metamorphosis, another molt. So there's molts in between each of these steps. And then the next big change, we're going to call that the merapsid. That's going to be the sort of middle stage. And look at these guys. They're all covered in little spikes. It's the same trilobite. And this is from one of those spots where you get lots of little trilobites and trilobite bits preserved just exquisitely, and you can dissolve them out of the matrix. But now here we've gone from no segments to we've got a cephalon, we've got a pygidium at the back, and we're starting to put in segments. And we'll put in, we've got 2 segments. Here we've got 3 segments, or maybe that's just 1 segment in the middle. But yeah, we're going to increase the number of segments. So we build the front and the back, then we separate those, then we start putting in middle parts. Like you do with your table on Thanksgiving. We're going to extend our trilobite from the middle. Yeah, that's just the way they worked. And then here you have a holaspid, which is an adult. Once they get to a certain number of middle segments, they stop growing and they will enlarge, but they will not go through any more major metamorphoses. And so, these things can be really tiny, but if you count the segments and they have the same number of segments as the adult, then it's an adult. It's just a really little adult. Yeah. So that's trilobite development. It's rare that you see these forms. Most of what you get in the fossil record are some adults. We may have some meraspids or meraspid parts in the collection. You'll have to look when we're in class. All right. Here are two assemblages, same trilobite, and I know this has been called isotellus at one point and boumastis at one point, I think, yeah. But these are probably different behaviors that we're looking at, because over on this side you've got all very intact shells. So the only way for these, because trilobites shed their exoskeletons, so either they were all super careful when they were shedding their exoskeletons and made sure to put them back together really nicely, or this is some other behavior. They're swarming over food. It's like a mating ball like some crabs do. No idea. On this side, though, look at this. We got a bunch that are flipped over, some that are right side up, a lot that are just little fragments all over the place. That's exactly what you would expect from molts. And so what you got here is probably a bunch of molts that the waves have washed together. There may be one or two intact individuals, or those could and probably are just molts that happen to stay together, got luckily pushed back together by the waves a little bit, didn't come apart. Whereas this may be something more like a mass mortality. It's a formation where it doesn't matter. You're not going to get preservation of the legs. You only get preservation of the sort of mineralized, heavy exoskeleton on the top. So we don't know for sure, at least until further analysis is done. You may be able to dissect the rock. You may be able to find some mechanical or biological or fluorescence trace of where the legs were, if the legs were there. And if they're all just molts, then you won't find a thing, and you won't be able to tell that from a situation where they just didn't fossilize. Unfortunately, fossils can be frustrating. Here's another frustrating thing, or wonderful thing. Over in Morocco, in the Fezuata formation, the Fezuata shale of Morocco, they get some wonderful fossils with great soft tissue preservation. Here you can see they're counting up the number of middle segments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a pygidium at the back end. These are all adults. They are looking good. And what you find are long lines of this particular trilobite. It's named Ampix. And you just have rows of them. And these things, look at these. Rows of them. Occasionally, some other trilobite will try and horn in on the action and get in here in the big Ampix row. No idea. There's one speculation that this is some sort of mating behavior. There's another speculation that these guys are all, there was a log here maybe, and these things all fossilized under it. But there's great preservation here, and I think if there was a log, we would see something. Is it a long kelp leaf and they're all just hiding underneath it? No idea, but it seems to be mostly these Ampix trilobites doing it, and it seems to be mostly in this one spot where they are recovered that they are doing this thing. So whatever it is trilobite behavior, and it's mysterious. At least for now, it is fairly mysterious trilobite behavior. Okay, what else can we learn about trilobite behavior? So these are from the Emu Bay Shale. And these are trilobites with really big, like here are the eyes coming around the side. So this is a pretty big eye for the time. Lots of little tiny eye spots. And so we would interpret that this thing is fairly visually focused. It would have been kind of a visual, possibly even a predator organism. And this was also big. I don't know how big an Australian 20-cent coin is, but big. Yeah. Anyway, in the Emu Bay Shale, you find little chunks like this. And these are little chunks that appear to have come from other trilobites, for example. And originally it was thought that these are just like fecal pellets that are sort of leftover plates and basically poop that were dropped by something like an Anomalocaris, which are also known from the site. More recently, it has been speculated that these are probably going to be from that giant trilobite called Redlichia rex, because they're in the right spots, and those are the common thing that is down there. And if you look at their legs, so they have modified leg parts. It's not all of them, it's certain legs. But these things will have the gill sitting on top, because it's a trilobite, they have to. Little regular walking leg with a claw, very normal. But then the first little segment of the leg is modified, and it's got this spiky, hardened, tooth-like thing. So that if you had two legs and you brought them together, they would crush into and chop apart like two little buzzsaws anything that was underneath. These are effectively something equivalent to a jaw. They are definitely not a jaw in the evolutionary sense, and they are not related to a jaw, but they're doing the same job. And this is a modification, and it's not found in most trilobites, but it's found in this one, which tells you that this one may have needed to crunch something up, and probably that's going to be an eating behavior. Here's some other eating behavior. So you'll get some of these little agnostid trilobites, and you'll find them along with little fragments. And so the idea is that these things did not have visible eye spots on them, were probably secondarily blind, so their earlier ancestors do appear to have had eyes. These are a little later, and they seem to have lost the eyes, the way cavefish can sometimes lose their eyes, and some insects that live in caves can lose their eyes. But it looks as though these are feeding on upturned versions of themselves, and you even get sort of adults that are crossing over much younger ones. This has been interpreted in this particular, somewhat controversial paper as evidence of cannibalism. So yeah, little cannibalistic agnostid trilobites. And agnostids are one of these groups that aren't one of the, they've been moved out of the trilobites proper, but they are trilobitomorph, and they do actually have three body segments, but they're a little different looking. And we have actually a good collection of several different trilobitomorphs that you'll be able to look at in class. So here's also from that paper, we're going over some remnants over here. And look, we've sort of swallowed up, this is a young one that's tucked away under there. And is this predation of the old on the young? Are they both eating something and not the big one eating the little one? I don't know. Here's the big one, and it's going over a broken up, much smaller one. And was it murder? Yeah. I don't know. Tough. You can also see on some of these trilobites, they'll have what appear to be little bite marks, little chips that are taken out of certain parts of the shell. And these were like originally not there, or little fractures in parts of the shell. And the idea is that maybe these are actually showing the action, sort of mechanical breakdown of trilobite mouthparts chomping on other trilobites. If they're scavengers and they live at the bottom of the ocean, and there are other trilobites that are down there, and they don't have any eyes, I don't know why they would have any reason not to consume each other. You'd have to have some maternal paternal instinct, or I don't know, some sort of loathing of cannibalism, and that may be something a little different than what trilobites would have been about. Trilobites have very neat eyes. There's actually several different kinds of eyes. So holocroal, they just have a sort of a surface, and there's a bunch of lenses. Now the lenses in trilobites are actually laid down. These are going to be from rock. So it is building itself a little rock crystal lens, and the shapes of these lenses. They'll sometimes have little bits carved out of them. These are the same shapes you would need to make in a lens like they use in lighthouses, for example, if you want to be able to focus light that is coming in. And so there are some that have that membrane over the top and then are separated out by a little bit. And there are others that are separated out, but all in a row, just like this. So these abathochroal eyes, those are probably the earliest ones. The oldest trilobites seem to have them. The holochroal and schizochroal eyes, those are later developments, modifications of the trilobite eye, and those probably give much better vision. You get lots more little eyelets. You get more sort of coverage, like these big rounded domes full of eyes, so that they potentially be able to pick up, some idea of what's behind you and what's in front of you and what's on the side. And since they have two of these, it's 360-degree vision. It's not a good vision of what's coming in on top or below, because they're on the top part of the shell, but potentially good for scavenging, potentially good for being a predator. You'll also see on, we think, some of the more predatory ones, the top of this little eye will have a little lip that sticks out, and I think that's a little sunshade to keep sun from getting in their little eyelets so that they can look forward and hunt and kill. So there are lots of different trilobites. They're occupying many different ecological niches, often at the same place, and this is part of why they were so successful, or maybe this is the symptom of being so successful. Now, there are other things out there. So if you look at abathochroal eyes, so this is the number of eye spots that you get per eye, and this is time going on. And so first you just have those, and then you get your holochroal, and later the schizochroal eyes are the next to appear in succession. They're also pointing out in this particular paper that there were some very large eyes found not attached to a body. We think they may be from something like an Anomalocaris now, if I'm remembering correctly. But they are very advanced compared to the rest of the trilobite eyes that would have been around at the time and would be what you would need to be a predator, essentially. Yeah. Speaking of trilobite eyes, did you know that many trilobites also had apparently a couple little eyelets roughly in the center of the head part? Think like a spider. It has those little eyes in here, sometimes little eyes on the side, and then it usually has two big eyes on the front, which it's going to use for hunting whatever it is that it hunts, or running away from big scary things if it's one of those spiders. And yeah, you've got the big eyes on the sides. That's going to be probably at least equivalent, like at least it's the same sort of modification, but maybe homologous. Maybe it actually shares ancestry with things like those central spider eyes. And so here you can see these little eye clusters that you find in the top center of the heads of some of these early trilobites. Very interesting. A little more trilobite behavior for you. On some trilobites, you will find on the third podomere, so 1, 2, 3, I think is what that is, and sometimes on the first or second, you find a series of spines. And if there were spines that are pointing down, these are probably, rake up the muck so we can eat something. Or if I get flipped over, it's a little bit of defense until you can maybe get flipped back right side up, is the idea. But these things are spines that point up, and up is into the, under the carapace, up is into the gills. And so the idea here is that this is evidence of grooming behavior. That it has all these little spines, and they're spaced out just right so they would fit in between the parts of the gills from the same trilobite. And so that just by moving their little legs, they could be doing like flies. You'll often see them sitting there and they'll sort of polish their eyes and do stuff like that. It may be that the trilobites would sit there and they would sort of comb their gills. Because if these things are wandering around in the mud, in the dirt, then there's a very real possibility that their gills get fouled, that they get bits of stuff and dirt and whatever up in there. And so if they have these little combs, they can run the little combs through the gills and clean them out. And just like we do with our Roomba, you got to clean out the little roller. Yeah, the trilobites could clean off their own little gills. And so these are from two different kinds of trilobites, but showing that these two both had a way to clean their gills, and one of these is Triarthris. Yeah, which is spelled correctly there, I think. Yeah. So here you can see the P4 polymer. Look at those little spines in there that would be pointing up under the carapace. Here we've zoomed in on it. Here's the actual gill itself. And yeah, you can see the little spikes that would be on top, and each one is pointing into the gills above it. And so it's not that the whole leg is covered in spines. There are only spines underneath the part where the gills would be. And the parts where the gills would not be, there are no spines there. So it looks like, yeah, it may be gill combing behavior. So that was one trilobite. Here's the other one, and you can see this one we have I believe it's on the, is it on the gills themselves? No, that's the gill on top. And so this is the leg. And so in that previous one, I think it's combing its, no, in this one, these are sticking up, and so they would go into the gill that's coming in from behind it. And I believe the previous one, it's the gill that's right on top of it that is being combed. So they're different modifications, but they're doing the same thing. And in both cases, it's just making the leg a little spikier so that it can clear debris from its own little gills. So, and here are these fat arrows are the combs that would be going up and combing those little gills. So that's been trilobites. That's a little of their behavior. I hope you found that interesting. I think they are fascinating little creatures.